Por más de 3 décadas, Adam Gopnik ha contribuido a las columnas de The New Yorker, además de hablar de arte y de conocer perfectamente la cultura francesa. Él está presente en la Ciudad de las Ideas con, desde luego, uno de los temas que interesan más al público mexicano, que es la elección de Donald Trump a la presidencia de los Estados Unidos. Thank you very much for the interview. So now, what's your perspective about Donald Trump's election?
Oh, I'm just beginning to try and formulate it, and I don't think I've figured it all, who has figured it out. But I do think that we underestimated the degree to which white America, in quotes, was beginning to see themselves as an embattled minority, and that they voted the way minorities vote for their ethnic tribal identity. They felt themselves under threat. Now, that may seem absurd. How are they threatened? But they perceived it. And the only other insight I might have now that I didn't have a week ago is that we forget that Barack Obama was a very revolutionary figure in a symbolic way. He was such a calm, eloquent, moderate man that we forget that he sort of came too soon, almost. He came almost before his time, before the country was able to elect him, but not to accept him in totality. And I think the great question for our time is, how could a man like Obama, who incarnates the virtues of eloquence and balance and rationality, give way to a man like Trump, who incarnates the virtues of irrationality and imbalance? And I think you have to assume that's a question of reaction.
So that certainly leads to another question, the question of representativity of the political system. There seems to be a wider gap every election, between the electorate and the citizens and the politicians, and that certainly has to do to what extent with economic model.
Yes, well, there seems to be a terrible disconnect right around the Western world right now between the people who vote and the people they vote for, and enormous alienation. And it's puzzling, isn't it? Because we don't live in a time of special economic suffering. We went through a terrible recession, but we've come back out of it. This is not the worst time on record to be in one of the wealthier countries, certainly in the United States. So then we ask, what is it that can cause that much anxiety in Britain at Brexit, in the United States with Trump, in France coming up with possibly Le Pen, God forbid. And we ask, how can that be? And I think the only answer really is that we live in a time of enormous planetary change. We live in a time where populations are exchanging.
It certainly has to do also with human rights. I mean, state nations are not able to control that, to guarantee basic human rights. What would be the main challenge in the field as to somehow extend the protection of human rights among immigrants all over the world, not only between Mexico and the U.S.?
It's one of the hardest questions. We see it in France, certainly. We see it in the United States all the time. As the grandson of immigrants, it makes me hugely sad because my grandparents came from other countries, and they were assimilated as citizens into America and never thought of that as being a difficulty. We have that great tradition of assimilation and of immigrants. I think that what's needed, to be honest, is just a lot of people grow old and die. Young people accept the world that's coming. That's their world to make. Older people reject the world that's coming. It's the world they fear will destroy them, will kill them. So I believe that time is probably the only medicine we can count on.
Finally, you were talking about social labeling, somehow the perception among particular societies of other ethnic groups that are conforming and nourishing it somehow. So now the question is, what is the role of media? Because nowadays media, in such a great gap between different ethnic minorities, are generating these labels. We have to say that social networks might not be as social as we think. We must say that sometimes media, great corporations, are building different social perceptions.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that this election, the Brexit election and the Trump election, have been a lesson, a reminder to us that all of our optimism about the power of digital media, of social media, to break down borders and break down barriers, that's a fatuous optimism, that isn't true. It's not necessarily true. It can be true, but that it isn't necessarily true. And that the old work of trying to re-educate every generation in the values of the open society, the values of pluralism, will go on. Social media will not save us.
Thank you very much for the interview, Adam Gopnik, colaborador de más de 3 décadas de The New Yorker, a quien le podemos seguir la pista en esta publicación.